Yeah, hi, Laura and Dide. It's really nice that you took your time today to do a vlog with me on your recently published paper on the inclusionary effects of performing work, a practice theoretical study of airport security work, which was published in the Journal of Management Studies in 2025. Before we dive a bit deeper and also focus on aspects that are not directly visible within the article, I would ask Laura if you could shortly describe what the paper was really about.
Yeah, the paper was really about the observation that basically all of the authors made before that most of the discourse of inclusion and inclusion policies revolve around the idea that inclusion can be created through human resource interventions, basically. And we thought what retreats in the background and gets very little attention is the work itself that is done by employees. And so we thought, or our main interest of this paper was to look into what are the inclusionary and exclusionary effects that are connected to actually doing the work, performing the work in everyday working life. And in the course of a larger project, we stumbled across this very interesting case of the airport's security company, which had a very heterogeneous workforce on the one hand, but on the other hand, no really active diversity and inclusion policies. And also, when Dide went there and talked to security agents, she found out that they talked about it being a very more or less equitable workplace where people had the feeling that they could work very well together. So we were really intrigued by this case and thought, okay, maybe this could be something where we can look into the role that work activities play for inclusionary and exclusionary effects.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the short introduction. As I briefly mentioned before, we are focusing today rather on aspects that are not visible in the article directly. So I'm also wondering, Dide, how did this project emerge? For example, I read in the paper that you went to a workshop with HR managers at the airport. Did you by then have the idea for the project already in mind, or how did you kind of manage to get into contact with the SEC company that you then did ethnographic work with?
Yeah, so as Laura already said, this is part of a larger research project, which was my PhD project on understanding inclusion, particularly in low-wage labor contexts. And during the beginning of my PhD, I thought the airport was a very interesting location to look at inclusion. Because I thought like the airport is interesting because it's not just a place that people go through, but it's actually also a workplace. So there are many jobs being performed there, and particularly low-wage service jobs such as catering and cleaning. So that was one of the reasons that I thought the airport is an interesting place, but that's also because many of the jobs there were team-related jobs, which was important for me because I wanted to do participant observations. So I want to be part of a team and observe how they perform their work and how they work together. And because the airport is like diversity is more or less a given. So I was also not so much interested in the question, how can we create more diversity or more heterogeneous workforces, but more how can these diverse or heterogeneous workforces become more inclusive. So I wanted to look at the airport, and then I found this network of airport companies that work together to strengthen the labor market at the airport. And they had this particular project in the inclusive airports. And this is where I found my gatekeeper, a really important a person who was really excited about my research project and who opened many doors for me. And she also introduced me to the monthly meetings of this network where her HR managers would gather to talk about different issues to strengthen the labor market. One of the issues being creating more inclusive labor markets. And there I could pitch my research projects. And I basically offered myself as an additional free employee. And that's when luckily I was able to get into these companies. So there was kind of an interest in the topic of inclusion, which made it easier for me to get access.
It's really interesting. Thank you. I also have a follow-up question for you, because you particularly worked with security agents for that project. So I was also wondering, how did you manage to make them comfortable working with you, being around with you? How did you motivate them to talk to you? Because you said you also offered yourself to be an additional employee. How did this all work out?
Yeah, so I think it makes all the difference when you actually do the work yourself. So before I started this whole project, I thought I need to do some pilot version of doing ethnographic field work. So I started before the security company with following warehouse workers. And I just followed them while they were doing their work. And there I've noticed there was so much distrust and discomfort with me being there and asking questions. And it felt like, for them, it felt like I was checking on them. So I knew that I had to really do the work myself. So for the airport security company, I did not participate in all the security tasks, but I did some security tasks and also wore the uniform myself, which made it easier to get into touch with other security workers without me being like an outsider checking on their work. So that made it easier doing the work myself. But also what helped was that I did not really stood out that much, which I did in the so I'm always comparing it to the aircraft cleaning company where I also did field work, and there I stood way out because I was one of the only white Dutch cleaners, whereas in the security company there was more of a mix of Dutch and migrant workers, so I could more easily blend in. So I didn't really have to do anything extra to make them feel comfortable. I was working with them and could approach them at the security lines when traffic was slow.
But maybe, Dide, you also want to say a little bit about how you had to prepare for being able to wear the uniform and be there, because you had to go through several security checks, right?
Yeah, so it took quite some time to be able to get into the security lines and become one of the security workers. So there was this thorough background checks. I needed to pass an exam on basic airport security stuff. I followed several trainings. So indeed, I needed to do quite some. Yeah, I needed to wait a long time before I really had access. Indeed, yeah.
Okay, and you also did this kind of work next to your PhD work at university.
Yeah, which could be quite intense. So one of the things that I also learned was that I should not work like full 8-hour shifts, but maybe half a day or half a night, to also allow myself some time to work out all the notes I made on my phone. So that was one of the things that I learned by doing.
Yeah, what is still interesting to me is also you explained you did some security work there as well. So I was also still wondering, how did you then also manage next to the work? How did you manage to do the observations, to see what happened around you, and how did you took note of that? How did you manage to keep track of all this various information?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I would just mostly focus on performing the work well. So I was more concerned about doing that well rather than keeping track of everything that happens around me. So I also wanted to not make mistakes. So that was like, in the beginning, it was just me trying to do the work well, learning the work, copying the work of or the behavior of people around me. And over time, I got more, it became easier to do the work. So I was able to also start conversations with the people around me about their personal experiences, and also to start to notice other things that were happening around me more. But I also think the first part of me just trying to understand the work, trying to learn the work, also really helped me to have this more practice theoretical lens on, why people carry out the work the way they do. So to really understand the practice of airport security work, how it is organized, how it is carried out. Yeah.
Thank you for all those elaborations. Maybe one more last question on your ethnography experience. I have also read within the paper that, for example, then during toilet breaks or during your canteen breaks, you were taking notes. Then, of course, also in ethnography, it's important to do informal talks also with the participants you work with. So how did you also then manage that, to take the notes in those breaks, while also trying to engage with your colleagues to get to know them better and to get to know their perspectives even better?
Yeah, so there were certain moments where it was like not uncommon to take out your phone. So during the breaks, other security agents would also take out their phone. So then I could really write down all the things that I noticed and remembered. But there were also moments where I just would sit at a table and indeed try to interact with others, try to build relationships. And there I would just try to focus on the conversations and try to remember as much as possible. And then after the break was over, find a moment to go to the toilet quickly and write it all down. So it's always a struggle with trying not to disturb the conversation, trying to really invest the conversation, but also trying to remember everything that was happening and trying to find moments where you can write it down. And that's why I also said I could not do that for longer than 4 or 5 hours, because I really also needed the time to work it out after, because then you still remember most of the things that happens, rather than waiting till the next day.
Thank you. That's really interesting and quite impressive what you managed to do there. Now let's get a bit more into the topic of finding your research questions and also finding your authorship team, because you said you did the ethnographic field work, and you also told me before we started the recording that you then got to know Laura. So I was also wondering at what stage of the project did your authorship team emerge, because you actually also write that article together with Maddy, Janssens and Marieke van der Brink. So when did the authorship team emerge?
So at the beginning, I did my PhD under supervision of Marieke van der Brink and Laura Dobusch. And I think it was right after I finished my fieldwork at the airport security company that we asked Maddy to join, Maddy Janssens, as she is an expert in both diversity research, but also on practice theory. So we really want to have her with us to focus on the everyday enactment of work activities.
Thank you. Maybe a question to Laura, because Dide, she collected all the data. So what helped you then, as so to say, external participants to grasp all of the data that Dide collected during her field work? How did you manage to get a shared understanding of those observations from Dide?
I mean, I would say there are several components that helped us. So the first one is that I and all of the other co-authors, or at least Marieke, were closely collaborating on this project with Dide. So we were also, the PhD started actually with literature work, and we were, the first paper that Dide wrote on in her PhD was about low-wage labor and whether or not it is actually taken into account from an organizational inclusion literature perspective. And then also Dide worked in this aircraft cleaning company. So we also already had this comparison, comparing the different data that Dide has gathered on the one hand. On the other hand, we had several meetings where we not only discussed like the field notes and what Dide has written, but also I remember several meetings when Dide came to the office after her fieldwork day, and then we just chatted about what has happened and what really stuck in her head. So I think it is also, to some extent, proximity in a very basic physical sense, that you are close to each other in an office and can speak about it on a very rather continuous basis. But in this case, particularly also, I think what helped us was that we all kind of knew the other side of the airport security work by going through airport security checks ourselves. So it was not like a very different context where we had no idea, but we were all kind of all the time trying to make sense of what Dide told us, also comparing it to our own experience. So I think that also helped.
And I guess also it were those conversations then that helped you as authorship team to come up with the paper idea, the theoretical contributions.
Yes, definitely. But what also helped us were the many rejections and revisions the paper has taken. So we were challenged. I mean, this project was to get this paper published was about 5 years. And we were challenged continuously through this whole journey, which were reviewers asked us for more data and more substantiating with more empirical substance, and also for sure refining our theoretical lens, refining our terms that we are using to describe it. So this was an ongoing rolling process for these 5 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you also just said, Laura, continuing with more data, engaging with more data. Did that mean for you, that you have to go back to the field, or was the data already there and you just, so to say, needed to make sense of the data that was already there?
Yeah, most of the data was already there, so I need to go back to the data. I did check with some of the trainers and some HR managers to check some basic things that I wanted to have to recheck. What was quite unfortunate though was that I also really wanted to do like another member check with the airport security agents, but we did not manage to do that because that was actually when the lockdown happened during COVID. So that became a bit more difficult to organize that. So yeah, that's one of the regrets that was not possible during that time. But most of all, I had to go back to the data, and back through my notes again and again and again, and
maybe to give sorry.
You go ahead.
No, maybe to give one example about what this means, going back to data. So we started with this very broad question of, okay, how was the practice of airport security work connected to or related to or impacting inclusion? And then through our work on the paper, we realized, okay, we cannot only focus on the inclusionary effects, but we also need to look into exclusionary effects and maybe how they even are connected. And this was rather in the later stage of the paper. So we then went back, or Dide basically went back into the data to look, okay, what are the exclusionary effects? So to give you one idea, the scanning machine, the X-ray machine of scanning the luggage has the effect that kind of all of the security agents have to change their position in a certain amount of time, but this also equalizes what they can do, and it has an impact on which kind of relationships evolve among the security agents. But at the same time, this had the exclusionary effects that people with, for instance, visionary impairments were not allowed to be employed because they had to be able to work the X-ray machine. So, and that's, for instance, when we went back to the data and looked for these connections of inclusionary and exclusionary effects.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for that explanation. I mean, you said just you also suffered from quite a lot of rejections, but still the paper is published now. So I wonder also what were the major milestones, so to say, of the project, of the paper, before it got published, so to say.
Yeah, maybe we can both answer this, Laura.
Yes, absolutely.
So for what I really liked is that the paper was already included, for instance, in the master's program here at Utrecht University, but also at KU Leuven, Maddy told me. So students were already engaging with the paper to understand practice theoretical approaches to inclusion. So that was what I think is really nice, that it was already being used. But we've also, of course, presented our work at several conferences, at AOM or EAGLES, particularly in the practice theory groups, which was really nice to get feedback from practice theory scholars, experts. So yeah.
I think maybe to add on that, publication-wise, I think for every paper, it's important that at some point it finds like a group, a community that appreciates to some extent what is going on, and that you find not only critical reviewers and comments, but also friendly reviewers in terms of that they kind of really understand what you try to do, but also help you to make it better. And I would say at some point at Journal of Management Studies, this happened. And this was really great for us because we had to put a ton of work into it. But it was clear that most of the reviewers saw something in the paper and a contribution. And I think that is necessary for any paper to be published at some point, that you are appreciated, and that you still want to put in the hard work. Yes, but people need to get some idea of what you're trying to do and understand that.
Perfect. Thank you. Maybe actually to already close our conversation. I mean, now we talked quite of many aspects that are not visible within the paper, but then coming back to the contents, actually looking in the future, how would you like contemporary research to build or to extend your work? What are future avenues of research with your work?
Yes, I would say from this perspective of bringing diversity, equity, and inclusion research and practice theoretical approaches together, I think we are at the beginning. We see that there is still, a huge focus on the individual and changing the individual mindset, and a practice theoretical perspective kind of puts it upside down and decenters human agency in the sense that it is understands it as more embedded into practices or in constellations of practices that are already going on, and changing this or having this lens kind of fundamentally changes on where you look for or look at in terms of to where change could happen or different social orders might emerge. So for us, I think it would be enormously great if there would be more research with a practice theoretical perspective, also in times of multiple ecological crisis or like AI applications that are disrupting any kind of a context at the moment, and develop this more than human agency perspective that is understood as relational than individualistic. That would be my answer to that.
Thank you. So thank you very much for your time. It was really interesting to also grasp better the background of the paper. It was really interesting. Thank you.
No, we thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our paper, about 5 years of our work.
Congratulations for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.